Welcome to Philly Fortune Talks with your host, Jake Penny, where the city's brightest minds share the secrets behind their success. Are you ready to be inspired?
Imagine blending psychology, spirituality, and business to transform leaders into conscious, impactful executives. Today, we explore the journey of Ang Onorato, a self-proclaimed corporate hippie who guides leaders to elevate their people, profits, and the planet through deep self-leadership and unique storytelling. With over 25 years of experience in executive research, leadership, development, and business strategy, Ang combines holistic inner wellness with leadership development. Her approach has led to top performing executives and organizations, ensuring future leaders reach their highest potential. Now let's uncover Ang's journey, her innovative leadership programs, and her commitment to creating a meaningful workplace. Ang, it's a pleasure having you on Philly Fortune Talks.
Oh, Jake, thank you so much. And it's always fun kind of hearing your intro back because you kind of go, oh, wait, who are they talking about? That is me. That's no, I really do appreciate you inviting me on, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Perfect. So let's dive in, Ange. You know, your career uniquely blends psychology, spirituality, intelligence, business. Can you share what initially inspired you to integrate these disciplines?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great question, and I love sharing this with people because, you know, I think all of our origin stories, they come from somewhere, right? And to be honest, I come from two parents that were educators, and my dad was he's a superintendent. He worked for the state of New Jersey in education policy as well. And so did my mom. And so, the idea, I've got some family members that were entrepreneurs and things like that, but I always saw myself in some sort of giving, helping profession. I really didn't see myself doing business or understanding P&L statements or anything like that. So my plan was PhD school and, get up, and I always said I was going to be like Dr. Phil on the stage, like for Oprah, just kind of healing the masses. And, upon graduating undergrad, I took a year off. I was going to do that before applying to PhD school, landed in a company at the time when technology was just kind of burgeoning as both a function and an industry. And it was a global company. So I got to understand that. And I was in the sales and marketing support area, and all of a sudden kind of fell into this, wow, I can blend like the psyche behind what makes people want to buy, as well as working with the people in the company and what makes them engaged, and how do you determine who's going to get promoted. And when you're young and in your career, you're like a sponge, and you kind of take it all in. But I always had this desire to get to continue my education and get that PhD, and really bring the clinical therapeutic element to that. So I was doing really well, got in the corporate space, got into consulting. One thing kind of led to the other, and I kind of really opened my aperture of how can I eh, get more involved in leadership, and was working in executive recruiting and placing CEOs and all of these things. But I was still fairly young in my career. And then 9/11 happened. And so everything shut down, including recruiting for, executives. And I said, well, it's perfect time to go back to school. So I finally did go back, formalized, got my clinical degree, did all of that, got certified in a whole number of other different modalities, but really found that it wasn't enough for me just to kind of hang a shingle and do that work. That it was really when the light bulbs kind of went off and said, I'm in recruiting. There's a big function of recruiting is about how do we assess the candidates? How do I make those decisions every day? How do I get to understand their stories so that I can put the right slate of candidates in front of my clients? And then how do I coach my candidates the right way to get the hire, to accept the job, to negotiate their salaries, right? So it started to all interconnect. And then some more time goes by, and there's personal journeys and trials and tribulations that we all, go through. And I found myself at a crossroads with all this business as well as psychology and clinical therapy experience, and feeling like there was a really big thing missing in my own life. And so I'd always been into yoga since my teens and loved meditating, but it was like not something I really formalized. And I really didn't, talk to a lot of people about it, because back then, we're talking when I started my career, you didn't really walk into work and talk about, your spiritual intelligence. It just wasn't something that executives were talking about. So I kind of started doing my own healing journey and trauma release journeys, outside. And then major light bulbs started going off saying, wow, there's a lot of people like me in leadership that look great on the outside. We're doing really wonderful things, but people talk about glass ceilings like there's market imposed or economic or corporate imposed glass ceilings, and they do exist. But I found that for myself and a lot of my people that I coach and clients, even then, we were bumping up against our own glass ceilings. In a lot of cases, glass boxes that we put ourselves in because we were not fully in touch with the stuff on the inside. And without understanding that fully, you can't totally create and lead with your true leadership voice, right? You can't fully tell your leadership story if you're not bringing the full essence of everything that makes who you are. And so after a long time, I kind of realized that there's a program and a methodology that I've kind of created, blending all of these elements. And that's why I do call myself a corporate hippie, because everybody knows what corporate is, everybody knows what a hippie is, and you put them together. Some people initially go, that's a little scary. But as soon as they start talking, they'll realize that it really, especially in our world today, there is so much noise. There is so much competition. Whether you're trying to start a company, sell something, get promoted internally, start some philanthropy, whatever. There's just so much noise, and people are also demanding authenticity
Right.
in products and in marketers, whatever. And so it came really clear to me that the corporate world for many years has taught us, here's how you speak about yourself, here's how you go through your resume, here's the corporate speak that you use. And there's no way to really separate people's uniqueness unless you can tap inside and bring to the surface the elements that make you unique. And that comprises three main areas for me. It's elements of your lived experiences, it's elements of the way that the world around you, that you've perceived it when you were even coming up, growing up, and then how do you see yourself in that world that you've now perceived, created, right? So the stories that we create in our minds. And then the third piece is something that we're only now really allowing ourselves to talk about in business, in the business realm, which is what kind of generationally inherited imprints
Mm.
did we start with? So those three things together, they impact us in so many more ways. And it's not always negative. I think people don't want to go there because they think it's always big and scary. But sometimes they're the beautiful essence of who we were as kids that we just kind of put on a shelf because school and the corporate world told us to act this way, grow up, be an adult. And so what I do with people basically is I have many processes and services and ways that we work together that help them tap into that inner peace to create and enhance their self leadership, which creates that leadership voice so that they can really effectively communicate the value of their impact. And I say it that way because I think there's a very common usage of these terms where everyone talks about show your value. What's my value prop? What's my elevator pitch? And really, again, in this world that we live in today and noise, it's about, can you communicate the value of the impact that you bring no matter what you're doing? And the impact that you bring is way beyond skills and experience. It's also all those other things I mentioned. It's what your uniqueness and your unique abilities bring together. So in a very big nutshell, that's sort of my journey and how I got here and why I do what I do and how I do it.
Yeah, I believe like mindfulness, spirituality is like a big thing, especially in corporate culture, because corporate lacks culture. And not just like, different cultures as like ethnicities, but just in like the way people work, how their values, their missions, their purpose, they're lacking all those things. And unless you're spiritual and mindful and really get aligned and break those limiting belief barriers that you've inherited, like you said, from previous generations, from your parents that and the people around you that you grew up with through school, through college, to your first boss or whatever it is that told you all these things of what you are. So it's that perceivedness. It's like you got to break that shell off. That's what people tell you. That's not who you really are. It's funny too, because I went, you're probably well aware, but Temple of the Universe, Michael Singer.
Hmm.
So I'm in a men's group with high like executives and not, and they're like their prime like
Amazing.
teaching in this men's group, this mentorship. It's not about financial like well-being and everything. It's like we follow the untethered soul, Michael Singer's practice. We go down to the Temple of the Universe, and it's like mindfulness and spirituality is like at the core of everything. But that's awesome.
It's
Um,
amazing. I will say Michael Singer The Untethered Soul was, I would pretty much say that that was kind of the golden thread for me that opened up myself and my vessel in such a big way, because I had been doing a lot of this work for many years, and I had all these years now of, you know, graduate school level textbook, here's clinical, here's how you work with people, here's how you diagnose them. And I was very conflicted myself. And when I finally, I've read it many times since, but the very first time I read The Untethered Soul, it was like everything started to make sense. So that's amazing that you're tuned into that too, because it is the way he speaks about it, the way he presents it. He just makes all of us feel normal. It's part of it. Here's how you just tap into, really connecting with your soul. And you're absolutely right. We've got to learn to bring more of that into our work, especially because, this isn't generations ago where there was work and life were completely separate. And then
Hmm.
there was a generation of, like Gen Z, my generation, let's talk about trying to bring work-life balance, which was never really real because we all grew up with no parents, right? Because they're both working all the time. And today we're working at our kitchen tables. So the work is life, life is work. And so I don't think that we can afford to not pay attention to how important that spiritual intelligence is in what we do, because people aren't hanging up their jackets of trauma when they come in the door in the morning, and they're not picking it
Right.
back up when they go for the commute home. The whole being is showing up. And the more we can be aware of ourselves and our own triggers and how we respond, the more safe spaces that we can create for the people that we work with, and treat our clients and communities and the whole thing. So I'm right there with you on that. And it's definitely an important feature.
Absolutely. So your approach emphasizes, a lot around holistic inner wellness and leadership development. What key strategies have been essential in achieving like transformational results for your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you asked that question, because, and I always have to clarify two big points when I kind of answer a question of this in this vein, because number one, when I talk about things like generational inherited or schools, there is nothing in what I advocate or my programs that I say allow anybody to be in a blaming mode. This is not a finger pointing. This is not, making excuses or blaming the parents. Especially I was fortunate to grow up in a beautiful home, and the notion that I'd be blaming my parents for anything that was on with me, it would never fly, right? So it's not about that. It's also not about the way that I was taught in grad school. And I don't mean to disparage the entire field of clinical therapy at all. But a lot of the modalities that I use today that have instantaneous, in some cases, or major impactful transformations for my clients, some of them that were developed over 40 years ago weren't even in my textbooks in
Mm.
2005, right? So there was this little bit of this challenge I went through to say, I'm being trained all this stuff, but the only way that I'm being taught is to find what's wrong with somebody and diagnose them. And so my whole foundation is built in neither one of those things: no victimhood, no blaming, and no diagnoses. It is, and it doesn't mean there aren't things that people do have and certain need meds, but my program is really based in helping guide people to their own self leadership. And I say that as if my favorite term is to say I'm the banks to their river. They flow, I'm just the banks holding them in. So as an example, one of the things that I do, and I had a call earlier today with an executive, and she even said, "Oh my gosh, 2 weeks ago you shared this with me, and now look at what I'm doing. I'm in front of the CEO," because it was that quick of a transformation. And it's around the idea that giving somebody the advice of just changing your mindset doesn't work in of itself. It doesn't
Mhm.
work if you don't understand the root causes that created the mindset in the first place. And there's millions of dollars of books and trainings out there about change your mindset. So what I do is say, we're start by reverse engineering that process. And I start with pay mind to even one word of the vocabulary that you're speaking externally about yourself or about your work or whatever it is. Because when you speak it externally, it's how you hear it yourself internally. That creates the story inside your head. The story then dictates the actions that you take or don't take. Those actions then create the feelings that you feel about yourself, positive or negative, depending on what action you're feeling or taking or not. And then all of that come together to imprint the mindset that many of us have just been operating from. So one of the simple things that I do, and it's not easy to do, but it's a simple concept, is working with people when I'm coaching, and I'll listen to, so tell me your story. What do you do? And I can go right to one word sometimes and say, let's try a different word. What's the
Mhm.
opposite of that word? And then we reverse engineer that process, right? So that you are co-creating and recreating a version of the mindset of now what you're going to operate from. You can show up to work tomorrow because you have a different mindset, but not because someone told you to just change the mindset. It's like telling an
Changing the
alcoholic,
paradigm.
right, just say don't drink if you're an alcoholic. Well, they would if they could. They need more help,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And so that's the an undertone of, and then there's obviously I do very, very deep, intensive, sessions, but or programs, but just as a basic, here, learn this exercise. It can be daily transformative for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a friend that was going through a little slope, downward slope, and I was like, you have to change your paradigm, the way you're thinking. I was like,
Mhm.
write down on a piece of paper, like it's a stupid, you may think it's a stupid exercise, but write down how you're feeling, all the bad, negative stuff that you're just feeling right now. Okay, now write down another piece of paper, all of what you want to feel as if it is in the current state. So now start a fire in your backyard, burn that negative thing, that negative paper, as you're saying all the positive stuff out loud. And like, it's that separation of like, even though it sounds pretty dumb, some people it could work, that pattern interrupt change, that people need to separate themselves as changing their new perception of what is, because it's just like a uh, false notion of like what you're telling yourself at the end of the day.
Mhm. Oh, 100%. It's very valuable. I mean, I think it's that exercise that you mentioned is super powerful, and it's very helpful. And I think, yeah, and sometimes it can just start with one word. And sometimes people say things. We all say things so unconsciously. It could just be, my boss never acknowledges me. It could just be that simple, and then say, well, okay, and then you follow that pattern. And then what if I say, my boss values my leadership voice, right? And then you reverse engineer the process from there. You wake up in the morning and it's like it's happening, right? And you reinforce that. It helps you build that scaffolding for every day to go in there. Same thing, burn the piece of paper of what was, and now this is how you recreate the new space that you're living in. And I've seen it on a daily basis, the immediate transformation that people can get from something that elementary, let's say, in
Right.
terms of the process, right?
So when assessing and coaching leaders, what qualities do you prioritize and why?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, like I said, when I start a session with folks, even if I've been working with them for a long time, I try to start every call and just say, what would make this extraordinary call for you today, or visit, meeting? Where are you? Meeting them where they are, number one. And then as the banks to their river, I will kind of start the conversation and say, where are you today? Where are you flowing today? What's working? What isn't? And then what I'm trying to uncover for them is getting them quickly out of the surface level awareness of what
Mm.
they think they're at. And then I listen very carefully in the gaps of what's not being said. And then I will reflect that back to them in a way that, and one of my favorite techniques is doing that in a way that, and I'll say, look, let me tell you a story about a client of mine, and I'll reflect back, and then they'll be like, okay, and what's the moral of the story? And I'll be like, do you recognize that person? Right. And it will be a reflection of where they are. So I think, the characteristics or the things I look for, I'm looking, and it sounds a little crazy to say, but I look for the gaps. I look for the gaps in what they're not saying. And I look for the gaps in terms of what they did say, but if there's something that's connecting the dots that's missing, and that's where I'll kind of go. I'll kind of go there, because it's in that the beautifulness is. Because when I can guide them there and they can get an awareness
Yeah.
that I'm so totally unaware of that thing, sometimes that one little piece can be the biggest transformative thing that they need in that moment, right? So that's been very, very effective, I think. And it really honors the person too, because it lets them be fully authentic and feel safe in doing it.
Right. When they have that self-realization of that epiphany, it's like, oh wow, I figured that out on my own. You just helped guide them there.
Yeah. You said that the one most important, if I were to put a cherry on top, and maybe a core message of everything I do in my work is I want people to realize that there isn't anything wrong with them. Many people are very successful on the outside, but they're not feeling it on the inside,
Mhm.
and that they don't need a diagnosis. What they need is to be led back to themselves and have permission to create self-leadership. And everything boils down to that. So when I look for leaders, I don't care how accomplished they are, what their net worth is, how many millions they have. My job is to guide them back to themselves and feel the self-leadership, the control, the autonomy, the permission they have to fully step into their voice and then be that person. And that's really what it's about every day. That's what I love to do when I wake up every day.
That's amazing. Coming from the what are they the serving heart.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said about like balancing personal and professional life because this is a lot of high performers, um, even just regular, ordinary people that um, you know go to work every day. It's like, how do people is it work-life balance or is it work-life integration? I'm a big believer in integration because, like you said, I don't believe it's work is life, life is work. So, for instance, for yourself, what daily habits or routines help you stay like focused and effective?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree 100%. For me, it's work life integration, right? Even at the time that we're recording this, right? We're doing it at what most people would think is an off hour, but I enjoy it. I love it because it allows me to integrate other things in my life throughout this day and be fully present to do this piece of quote unquote work, right? So what for me, um, a non-negotiable every morning is doing some pretty intense breath work
Mm,
and meditation. It's taken me a long journey to get there, but breath work, cold plunging, I have to add that into.
nice.
But breath work alone has just been more than many things. It clears out so much that I've accumulated during the day. And when you do this work, we do take on a lot of energy from other people, right? So it's really important that I start there. And then I'll go into, getting ready for the day and getting prepared and doing that typical stuff, but just getting my brain right for where's the energy I need to put today in the most important areas and just showing up powerfully as a leader throughout the day. And then sprinkling in during the day, reminders of, did I do this right stretching? Did I, do this? Did I do other activities for, marketing and things I need to do? And just, I literally blend it throughout the entire day. Where I think a lot of us have also grown up with like, get up super early, get the 5 a.m. routine, go to the gym, and then that's it. That's how much you have for yourself during the day. And everything else is work, after
Right.
curricular, family. I literally live by that facet of integrating throughout the day because we don't live 2 generations ago. We live today, and that's what life is, right?
Right. Usually like people just wake up and life attacks them. It's like they're already having their defense on. They're not preparing. They're not waking up earlier to serve themselves first. And I love that you do the cold plunge in the morning and everything like that and breath work. I've been trying to get down Wim Hof, but every time I try to do it, I start to pass out. So I haven't got there yet. It's
What
definitely
one
hard.
quick thing, make sure when you're starting it, because that's what I do it laying down. A lot of people think they try it sitting up,
I was
and
doing
you
it.
can
Yeah.
absolutely get a little bit more. And then use both open your nose and your mouth simultaneously. People think it's in and out, but if you do both, when you compensate for both, and then there's a way you slowly exhale. But laying down prevents the lightheadedness and the feeling like I'm going to pass out type of thing.
Got it. Okay, yeah. I was doing it sitting at like sitting Indian style and I was
Yeah, no,
about to pass out.
you can work up to that, but no, start the easy way. Yeah,
I totally believe in a morning routine. I've been a huge fan of like the superhuman protocol. I've built a superhuman protocol in my house, like the sauna, the red light, PMF mat, all that stuff, cold plunge. But for somebody that doesn't have that, like PMF is just like grounding. Really, you can go
yeah,
outside with your on your bare feet first thing in the morning, get sunlight, get grounding. Um, all those good things. Red light, just get pretty much sun if you can. But all those things is, serving yourself first, before you serve anybody else. Because at the end of the day, if you can't take care of yourself, you don't take care of yourself, can't take care of anybody else.
Exactly. You brought up one other quick thing, Jake, about grounding. And so grounding for me has many different, versions of that. I mean, if you want to get grounded in what you're doing, but like you, I actually even sleep on a grounding mat. I have a grounding
Nice.
mat under my desk. And, if anyone of the listeners aren't familiar, it's a mat that basically you plug into your house that because all of our houses are grounded. Otherwise, we'd fry all of our electronics, right? And our bodies are the most highly charged electrical thing on the planet. So the fact that we walk on carpet and rubber soled shoes means that we are not balanced, we are not grounded almost daily. So if you can't get outside, even for 10 minutes, put your feet in the grass or whatever, the sand, then get a grounding mat at least. It helps, all kinds of inflammation. It helps to kind of keep you focused, truly grounded. And I think that we're fortunate that we do live in a time where this technology does exist as
Mm-hmm.
well, right? So if we have to and are living in this integrated way, it's important to integrate and take all the tools that you can. So I'm glad that you brought that up because it's a good reminder.
Yeah, absolutely. So your work involves creating trauma-informed workspaces. So can you share an example of, one, what that means to listeners, and then also how this approach has made, a difference in an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll kind of start with the second half of that question, first. But I think it was about 6 years ago, the Harvard Business Review did a study, and I think they interviewed about 111 companies to see which companies by design hired meaning conscious and or trauma informed leaders. And they evaluated them and they found that, or I think it was 230 companies or something. There was like 111 of them classified that they had programs where they specifically followed conscious leadership. And they followed them over a period of 10 years. And they found that the conscious led companies and the conscious capitalist companies outperformed the S&P 500 by a factor of 10. And so when you think about that, I don't think we talk about it enough about the human factor inside a business and how important that really is. So trauma informed, it's yes, it's a buzzword. I think it's an important word. I go back and forth a little bit where, sometimes it's important. People need to know what it is. We also don't want to scare people because I think in the corporate space, I want to be careful to remind people, look, we're not turning leaders into therapists. We're not saying that, but just being trauma informed is as basic for me as understanding, particularly if you are leading people, to have that awareness to say, if somebody shows up this way and they show up that way, or you know the recognition that trauma doesn't have to be a traumatic, terrible, abusive event. It can just be that they could have little events that happened to them, or they had something in the morning, or they did have something 30 years ago, but it triggers them to respond in certain ways. And
Mm-hmm.
so when people are ending up, responding to each other from a place of trigger and not from a place of understanding, quite frankly, that's why we have Karens and Kevins in the world, right? Because everybody is wounded and we're aggravating that wounding. And so what trauma informed really means for me in a very basic way is you don't have to go in and ask your people, tell me your deepest, darkest secrets, but you have to just have a level of curiosity and say, I wonder what's underneath that reaction
Mm.
by my team member, right? So rather than being like, oh, I'm going to report you, or I'm going to this or that, or we're going to go into a contentious meeting, call another meeting and say, hey, I noticed that when we got to this part of the meeting, this really bothered you. It seemed to really, really hit a nerve for you. I'm really open. I would love to have a chat with you on that. I want to see if, is there something that I can do differently? Is it something that if it's not even a personal attack, then ask them right now, would you like, support, advice, or space? Bring me into just where you're at a little bit. And that whole idea of being trauma informed, particularly as a leader, if you have a team that you're responsible for, it's incumbent on the leader to start this cultural shift, paradigm shift, right? To create a psychologically safe space. And that means allow the person to speak up, have a bad day without the typical command and control style of leadership that we've all grown up with, which is you're being belligerent, you're being insubordinate, you're being difficult, right? Because we don't know. And it's not our place as leaders to ask what's going on in your family, in your life. But you can certainly say, hey, I noticed that really triggered you. Is there something that we can do differently? Could we have another conversation around what would make this better? How can we do better? Right. And that's not being weak, and it's not being permissive of bad behavior either. It's being human, and it's being informed about the fact that there are responses that there's not a human that walks around that doesn't have imprinted things from those three things I said at the beginning: our lived experiences, the way we perceive our world, and what we've inherited. So a lot of times people react to things that they're not even aware of, because it's just a generationally inherited trigger point that if somebody speaks a certain way to them, they're going to fly off the handle,
Yeah.
right? And we don't have to fix that for them, but we can provide a space for them to have a dialogue that calms, that doesn't add fuel to that fire, if that kind of makes sense.
Right. Definitely does. Yeah. Understanding the place that they're coming from and seeing how we can work around it, but, or go about it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the informed part of that word just means, are you taking the moment to be aware that there are many, many, many things that drive people, right? And they are more than just their work. They're not just this thing that you see for 8 hours a day, not anymore, right? And so just being informed that there may be more to the story that isn't your job to fix or therapize, but it is your job as a leader and as a human to say, are you feeling okay that you can chat about maybe what would be a better approach for us
Hmm.
in this dialogue? That's not going to break anybody's back to take that approach, but I just don't think that we're doing it enough.
Right. It's, you know, a lot of employees are looked at as numbers on a spreadsheet. Performance, growth, 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 scale, scale, scale. Are we hitting these numbers? And they're not truly valued in the workplace.
Oh gosh, now that's a whole nother podcast that you just opened up for me, of my 3 decades of working in performance reviews and people. And luckily, I think a lot of organizations are finding new ways to evaluate and reward and promote their people, because it is a shame. There's a outcome of that, where when you put people because they have a certain title and say, you need to, I'm evaluating only on this performance against these numbers on a spreadsheet. And if they don't, or they don't do it that way, then they get deemed not valuable, not promotable, whatever. And sometimes just having that conversation, understanding, maybe there's something in this person that gets triggered, and they don't like cold calling, but they're really, really great at helping with marketing that creates warm calls. I mean, I don't know, right? I'm making that up,
Right.
but sometimes it's not always about this person's no longer a fit for the company because they didn't hit that same exact metric. Or it could be somebody doesn't want to do a certain thing because there's a trigger for them that they're not fully aware of, but they're backing away from, I don't want to get up on stage because that makes me feel fearful to present. Well, rather than saying, your leadership track now in this company is been stymied, ask them, hey, what about public speaking is the most scary for you? How can we get around that? How can we support you? It could be that simple, right? And then everybody's not being evaluated on just, and it doesn't mean for everyone that says, yes, we have to run a business that we need KPIs and metrics, 100%. But there's a way in which we can match people to that and still honor, who they are and what they might be bringing in the door every day when they come in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Match them with their superpowers. That way they can perform at their best. That way they feel valued because, they're doing what they like. And at the end of the day, if they feel valued, they'll feel a part of the mission, the purpose of the corporate culture. And at the end of the day, your KPIs will go up.
Absolutely. And everything you just described right there is allowing them to feel that you value their
Yep.
impact, that's the perfect circle, right? Each leader, each staff member needs to go to really step into their self leadership, go through that process, understand their own leadership voice so that they can communicate that. But it's got to be a two-way street. So if you're in the
Right.
organization and you're a leader, creating those environments and those mechanisms, processes, spaces, all of it for your staff to feel seen, heard, that their voice has made it through, and that you do value the impact. And if you can do them exactly like you said, Jake, then your KPIs are going to take care of themselves.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's just what that Harvard Business Review study determined, that when a company treats its stakeholders, its community, its employees, its customers, its vendors that way, just think about it. It makes everybody want to stay in the company. It makes people want to buy from them. It makes people want to invest in them. So it makes perfect sense that they would outperform the other, S&P 500 companies by that factor, because everybody's feeling part of it and seen and heard. And that's
Yeah.
just the basic of it.
And if they feel valued, they may most likely go that extra mile, where if they didn't feel valued, they wouldn't do that extra work that, that is outside of their scope. So yeah, at the end of the day, you make people feel good. They remember you based on how you made them feel, how they made you
100%.
feel.
Yep, 100%. I like to call that, in my space, I call that almost client astonishment, right? Transform them, help them get a breakthrough, give them more, show them more than they ever imagined, way above even expectations, and show them how they can be in charge of that for themselves. eh, People will never want to leave. They won't want to
Right.
leave you. They won't want to leave your customers. They want, it's a very basic concept. But I think, unfortunately, we live in a space of even more and more growing, greed and fraud and climbing over each other and being the best, and, be competitive and try to combat the noise in the market. And it's like there's two opposing forces there, right? So that's what's great about your show and podcast, and why I'm so grateful that you brought me on today to talk about some of these topics, because I hope they'll fall on the right ears and land in the right places.
Yeah, absolutely, Ange. So as we wrap up here, I have some final questions for you. For aspiring leaders, if you had one piece of advice for aspiring leaders, entrepreneurs, looking to make a significant impact, what would it be?
And I'm going to say this, and not because it's what I do. I say it because I've seen it over 30 years, right, play out in my work. The number one most important thing that I say is investing in themselves
Mm,
first, because nothing that we've talked about this last 40 minutes will matter to anybody if the people behind the mask of the work, right, if they don't do it for themselves, if they don't know how to do it for their teammates, um, if they're not open, if they're not vulnerable to say, I'm going to invest in myself in some way. Maybe it's just physical, maybe it is coaching, maybe it's therapy, maybe it's vacations to reset, whatever the case is. I think everybody's still stuck in this space of, I got to do more, I got to do better, I got to grind more, I got to do, who do I got to mentor from, who do I have to network with, who can get me in this door? And it's the go, go, go. But if you don't take the time and the money and the effort to truly invest in yourself, you're going to wake up one day, whether you're just starting your career right now or starting a second act version of your career, you're going to get very frustrated, right? Because we only have one of us. We can add as many things to it. But if you take on more and more opportunities and more mentors and you make more money, but you haven't created a strong scaffolding inside of yourself
mhm.
to hold on to that, someday, somehow the bottom's going to fall out of that, or you're going to stay stuck in that level of success in whatever glass box you've created. So to me, investing in yourself in all the ways we've talked about is the most important thing, because without that, I don't think you have the true level of fulfillment and success that anybody would actually desire.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I literally made a post about that yesterday about the most important thing you can do is invest in yourself. That is the highest ROI you can get. I mean, as long as you put everything that you invest in yourself, you put it to work in good use.
Right, right.
So for listeners who want to connect with you, learn more about your work, your coaching, what's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, simple thing, you can reach out on LinkedIn, and then right from there, you can also just get me at my website, which is just my name, angonorato.com. And I would love that. We're actually kind of preparing for the fall time here. We've got some retreats, some live events, some group coaching programs, the one-on-one, and also some what I call deep intensive sessions that I'm starting to offer now as well, that are kind of a one-on-one or co-facilitated depending on the individual. So all of that will be up on the website, adding some new things to it as we speak. So yeah, I would love to connect with anybody that is willing to invest in themselves and wants to learn more.
Awesome, Angela. It was a pleasure having you on Philly Fortune Talks today.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate you so much, and thanks for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Philly Fortune Talks with Jake Penny. Inspired to share your success story? Visit phillyfortunetalks.com/guest and let's inspire together.